And so when people are doing, discovery, I suppose, what's some of the stuff that they can find out, and what's important? Again, in your experience, maybe the conversation you're having with CTOs is what is it that they don't know that actually you can help them find out, and it's valuable for them to find out.
Well, it's interesting that a lot of companies just don't know how much data they've got, which is the first challenge. And actually, there was a survey done which looked at how much of that data is ever touched again. And 68% of data that is created will never be used again. So somebody's paying for that data. You're powering it, you're cooling it, you're hosting it. If you're in the cloud, you're paying for it on an OpEx basis, so it gets really expensive very quickly. So I think the first thing is actually companies being able to understand what data have we got, what's redundant, cold, what could be moved on to different tiers, what could be deleted, for example, and that's becoming more, never used to happen. People would never delete data. Now people are deleting data just because of the amount of data that's being created. So those are challenges. But then you've also got to think about, does that data contain confidential information, regulatory information, personal information for GDPR and other regulations? So companies are really having to put much more of and have a much better understanding of what they've got before they start to make any decisions about putting data into other environments or using it for other purposes. And AI is a big driver of that as well, because if you can spend millions on GPUs to process data using AI, but if you're wasting it on redundant cold data that's not, or data that's of no relevance, then that's just a waste of resources. So there's a lot of optimization that needs to be done around about data in the very first instance.
And we've talked before, haven't we, about how lots of things in IT are very cyclic. And I think one of the phrases that I haven't heard for a long time, but I've started hearing increasingly, is the idea of garbage in, garbage out. And within respect of AI, because actually, if we're going to use, as you said, if we're going to spend all this money on GPUs or cloud native services that are doing this kind of churning for us in terms of trying to gain additional value out of data, if we're just feeding rubbish in the first place, then I think actually something you'd said to me previously was that idea that you might get to the answer eventually. It'll just take an awful lot longer and may not be as good an answer as you want. Is that a driver that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, absolutely, definitely, actually. Optimizing before you start processing, because the two resources that are expensive in AI are the GPUs to process it and the data scientist's time to have to kind of pre-format data, use the data, analyze the results, etc. So really, you've got to kind of optimize those, and to do that, you need to look at what data you're putting in the first place, make that optimization call up front. Make sure it's relevant data so that you're getting the maximum out of it. But then for AI, you need to be able to wrangle that data, because a data set, which might be your golden data set, you need to use that not just for one AI process, but you may have ChatGPT, you may have modeling, you may have other analytics you want to run against this. If you have to hold lots of copies of that data to answer all of these kind of these kind of requirements, that gets expensive really quickly. So stepping it back and leveraging things like zero space cloning technologies on the storage side can make a huge advantage in terms of the cost of doing all of these things, but then also the time, because you can wrangle data sets, you can restore them, you can clone them in seconds. All of that makes a massive difference to the outcomes that you can achieve.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speed and cost is a huge part of that. The idea that if I want multiple data sets, we talked before about you put more and more data in the cloud than you need. Well, if you're going to I've put all this data in there and then I'm going to do it again with another copy of data. Well, on-prem, that might be a bit of capacity you're using up. But actually in the cloud, not only capacity, but the cost associated with the capacity.
Yeah.
That can be a huge thing. Before we wrapped up, there's a couple of other areas I just want to explore with you in terms of things that I hear from kind of CTOs when we're talking about storage and data. And I just wondered what your take was. I mean, we've kind of you've touched on compliance and governance before. One of the big drivers I've seen in terms of data strategy and rethinking how we look at data is regulation and regulatory frameworks. Is that something that you're seeing, and what kind of advice have you got from a NetApp point of view of how people can maybe start to meet some of the demands of those frameworks?
Yeah, I think people just haven't addressed these before in great scale, because the time and effort it takes to classify data, to discover it, to process it, to then tie it into regulations that you maybe have to adhere to, like GDPR, which has things along not just the storing of data and security of data, but also around about sovereignty of data and these types of challenges. So companies are much more keen on really kind of getting a handle on what they've got, being able to tag and classify their data, but only if you can do it simply, because that was the challenge before, was being being able to do it at scale, to do it quickly. And now there are tools and capabilities, of which we provide that can help you do that. And with that kind of knowledge, you can then build dynamic policies, and you can start to actually, not quite real time, but in near real time, start to work out when data strays outside of regulations, because that's one of the challenges as well, is that if somebody takes a confidential document and drops it into their storage repository in the cloud or into an S3 bucket in the cloud, you need to know that. And if that breaks your regulations, you need to be able to alert to it, take action. So there's much more of an automation requirement as well as a discovery and a classification requirement that needs to be put around data so that you can protect yourself at scale, because that's always been the problem, is how do I do that? And we've not been able to do that before. So the tools now are available to do that.
Well, you're saying, and kind of protecting at scale and also protecting across these multiple repositories, both on-prem in the cloud, inside of applications, inside of SaaS applications. One thing you mentioned, and I think it's a really interesting point, because it's been one of the challenges I've seen in this kind of governance and compliance space, is sometimes the complexity of doing that. So how are you seeing vendors like NetApp as well? How are you seeing NetApp or other vendors make that more straightforward for customers?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud has helped a lot, because we can build SaaS applications that enable us to bring features to market very quickly, to not have to have a change control window from a customer to bring in a new set of capabilities. So being able to build our capabilities in the cloud as a SaaS offering, but with on-prem collectors for the data, has really helped us scale the types of requirements that we can bring. And that's really meant that we can do much more quickly in terms of how we deliver for customers. So that type of environment, that capability that we've got now to use the cloud as well for offering services to customers, has really changed the landscape in terms of how quickly we can get to grips on doing that.